So here we are, November 2023. This is on, it's not. So throughout this presentation, something I like to do, I started doing a couple years ago, is I've added pictures of just different things that our kids are doing around the district. Charlie highlights a lot of them in our Friday news and announcements, but I thought it might be fun to have some in the presentation as we go through this too. So this first picture, that's Amherst Elementary's choir celebrating their 50th birthday. Okay. So the purpose of the forecast is a valuable long-range planning tool. So Ohio Revised Code 4512 or 5705.412 requires a 412 certificate. So a certificate of revenue for any district expenditures for new salaries or wage schedules, any appropriations resolution, any contracts that are over $500,000, or any contract that's a multi-year contract. In that case, we have to sign what's called a 412 certificate, and this forecast provides the basis for us to do that. So that certificate requires my signature, the board president's signature, and the superintendent's signature. The Ohio Department of Education and Workforce Development now you also use the forecast for determining a state's fiscal solvency. In this picture, we are looking at Westerville seniors getting ready to graduate. So the requirements of the 5-year forecast, we have to file a 5-year projection no later than November 30th of each year with the Department of Education and Workforce. We have to update the 5-year projection no later than May 31st. We have to include the current fiscal year and the ensuing 4 fiscal years. And we also include 3 years of actual historical information. Looking at the structure of the forecast, the 5-year forecast only includes our general operating fund. It does not include any of our special revenue funds, debt service fund, anything like that. I like to break it off in like 3 different categories. So the top section, 1.01 through 2.08, that is for revenues. Expenditures run lines 3.01 through 5.05. And then our changes in balances and reserves, those are lines 6.01 through 15.01. And they are numbered on the side of the forecast if you look at the actual forecast. And just a reminder for everyone that our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. And this picture is a picture of students participating in the Makers Expo at Heritage Middle School. Thinking about challenges of the forecast, if they come up. So legislative changes. House Bill 126 was a big impact to us with Board of Revision settlements. It eliminated our ability to do that. We also have the state legislature, which we'll talk about, talking about property taxes, property values, and how all that works. And looking at unfunded mandates that the legislature continues to throw at us, those could add unexpected costs to the forecast that we don't have currently included. The federal funds for ESSERs will expire over this year. The final round of ESSER funds expire this year. And then property values increasing has caused the legislature to look at those. And just a reminder that projections we have today are based on the best information we have available to us today, and they will most definitely change going forward as new information becomes available to us. And our pictures are students engaging in mystery science activity at Robert Frost Elementary. I think last year they dissected squids, so I'm not sure what they're doing there. Changes from last May to this forecast. So state funding was a big change. So the state updated the increase. They increased the updates, the inputs for the Fair School Funding Plan to the fiscal year 2022 costs. Previously, they had been using fiscal year 2018 base costs. as to calculate the funding formula. They updated that to fiscal year 2022. Now, just to remind everybody, we are in fiscal year 2024, so we're still 2 years behind on actual costs for operations. Interest rates have continued to increase, and then we've also updated staffing numbers to account for some plans for special education in the future. And this picture includes Mark Twain celebrating the many cultures in the community with Multicultural Night. It's supposed to work better from up here, that's why. Okay, so looking at the ESSER funds. So this is a slide that we've had for quite some time in the forecast presentation. We had ESSERs 1, 2, and 3. So ESSER 1 provided $2 million, and it ran from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th, 2022. ESSER 2 was $9.5 million, and it ran from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th, 2023. And then ESSER 3, the last and final round, that runs from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th, 2024. So that's the current fiscal year. These funds have to be obligated by June 30th and fully expended by September 30th of 2024, which is the next calendar year, but the current school year. ESSER funds are one-time funding that were provided to help with the cost of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. They're not part of the general fund, but we used the ESSER funds to cover expenditures that were normally paid out of the general fund. Because these were one-time costs, we didn't want to add programs with one-time funding, and so that's how the district worked that out. This being the final year, we will see all of those expenses come back to the general fund after this fiscal year. And then this picture is mock trial teams at Genoa, Heritage, and Walnut Springs Middle Schools. They came together to practice for a mock trial competition at Westerville City Council's chambers. They look so serious, don't they? I love it. Okay. So this is just a graph and table of all revenues. Things that we're looking at are property value increases, the Fair School Funding Plan. Just a reminder, our last operating levy began in calendar year 2021. The Fair School Funding Plan was implemented at 2/3 of the total through fiscal year 2025, which is next fiscal year. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And we saw the elimination of the Board of Revision settlements. We did have a big influx one time for the property owners trying to hurry up and settle before they were no longer able to do that. But that is approximately $1.2 million in revenue that we won't see in the future once that's fully realized. And then we had our interest revenue increase. So overall for revenues, fiscal year 23 actuals, we had 63% funding from our local property taxes and 25% from the state of Ohio, and then 12% from other sources. For 2028, our local property taxes are projected to be 65%, and 28% from the state and 7% from other sources. So this makeup is heavily dependent on what state funding looks like in the future and could definitely change. The picture here is fifth graders at Robert Frost Elementary learning about energy through the Ohio Energy Project. All right, local property taxes. So I want to talk some about how property values affect tax rates. So I have some graphs here that I want to show. But just looking at this, we're estimating property taxes to be at 64% of total revenue for the current fiscal year 24. And then our operating levy from 2019 began collections in 2021. This forecast is assuming a 22% increase in residential and agricultural property values, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and what that means. Because the state is talking about doing an average, that would be what it would be if they were to average our values, and then 4% for commercial and industrial. House Bill 920, which we'll talk about, restricts growth from increased values on all voted levies, and we will see an increase on inside millage, the unvoted portion, and from new construction, which we'll talk about. Tangible personal property taxes. These are taxes that are on public utility infrastructure. They make up about 2% of total revenues. And then the picture here is State Senator Andrew Brenner. So him and some other legislators visited our high schools to learn about our Career Pathways program. And so he's talking to Matt Fetro, our teacher at the shop at North there. He serves as the chair for the Primary and Secondary Education Committee and is very influential in the state legislature when it comes to property tax law. So,
is he known for being supportive to public schools?
I think it depends on what the subject is and what your perception of being supportive is.
That would be no.
Yeah, that would be no.
Not in my experience.
Yeah, mine either. Disappointing.
So just a little bit about property taxes. Inside millage is the non-voted millage that was established by the Ohio Constitution. So years ago, I couldn't tell you how. I've checked with legal counsel. They don't know how. But years ago, the Constitution established 10 mills for certain areas. I don't know how the lines were drawn, but overlapping jurisdictions, our portion of that is 3.8 mills. So we have 3.8 mills constant millage. So that never changes. All other millage has to be voted on by our taxpayers. So we call this outside millage. So what House Bill 920 was passed back in the 70s, and it prevents revenue from growing on any voted levies by reducing the millage rates as values increase. So if we look at property values, this is a very simple, as property values increase, tax rates decrease, which means revenues remain unchanged, essentially, on the voted levies. So to kind of show an example of this, we have the graph. This is a graph of our actual assessed property values from 2017 to 2023, and then I have estimates for 2024, 25, and 26. So the state of Ohio has the county auditors reappraise properties every 6 years, and then they do an update every third year in between. And so this graph shows 2017's reappraisal, which went into effect for collection year 2018, because we assess 1 year and pay the next year. And it also shows the 2020 update and the 2023 estimated reappraisal. So this is the estimate. So this table shows the tax millage, or also known as tax rates. There we go. So tax rates are mills. That's the unit of measurement that the state of Ohio uses to calculate property taxes. That's what millage is. The full rate, well, let's start with the inside millage rate, the yellow line at the bottom. That's the 3.8 mills that was established by the Ohio Constitution. As you can see, it's been the same since 2017, and it's not going to change going forward. The full rate, the blue line, that's the total voted rate. So these are rates that the voters approved on ballot measures. So that's the actual rate. If you totaled all of the ballot issues up that have been on the ballot, that have been approved by voters, that's the full rate, plus the inside millage. The effective rate for commercial, which is the gray line there, and the effective rate for residential and agricultural is the orange line. And so these are reduced as rates. These are the reduced rates that are used to calculate the property tax bills. So as the values increase, the effective rates decrease to ensure that property owners are not seeing inflationary increases on their property tax bill. So an example of this is in 2019, the voters approved a 5.9 mil operating levy. We started collecting in 2021, which is why you see the bump up in 2021 on the full voted rate on the blue line. However, the commercial and industrial effective rates only increased by 1.3 mils, and the residential and agricultural effective rates actually decreased by 1.2 mils. The district never collected 5.9 mils on that levy because of how values increased. So just to really drive this home, maybe, I have graphs. So that's the assessed values. You can see it's increasing. And I'm overlaying the effective millage or tax rates. And so we can see as those increase, those decrease. It's a very simple graph of how that works. And I should mention, the taxes are calculated, the effective rates, they're calculated based on different groupings of the counties. So your property tax bill is going to increase or decrease relative to your neighbors or the people across the county from you, right? So the county looks at it for the district. So if we were supposed to generate $40 million in total, they look at generating $40 million in total for the district, but it could affect different properties differently depending on where they are in the county. I do not receive phone calls from people who see property tax decreases, ever.
Hey,
Ever. I know, it's hard to believe.
hey, Nicole.
Yeah.
So, on the flip side, then, is if property taxes decrease to,
Would that go up?
yeah,
That's a great question. So let me go back to here. Maybe. This is like really challenging from up here. Okay. So the 5.9 mil operating levy, that's what was approved by voters. There was 5.9 mil and the county auditor said it'll generate approximately $14 million. So as the values increase, those rates decrease. If the values decrease, the rates would increase, but they would never go above 5.9 mils. So we would only generate up to what 5.9 mils would provide for if values decreased. So it does work both ways, which we saw during the 2008, 2009 recession. It does work both ways, but only up to the voted amounts. Let me get through here. Sorry. So let's talk a little bit about state funding. So state funding is subject to the biennium budget process. And it's projected to be 27% for the current fiscal year. And the current fiscal year biennium covers 24 and 25, right there. And the Fair School Funding Plan was partially implemented for fiscal years 24 and 25 for the current biennium, with 50% of the calculated increases going into effect for the current fiscal year 24, and then up to 67% of the calculated increases to go into effect in fiscal year 25. And this forecast does cover 3 budget periods. So 26, 27 will be a new budget period, and then 28 will be the 3rd budget period. So lots can change in that amount of time. The state share of local property taxes, I swear you can't make this up, it was formerly referred to as property tax allocation. These are reimbursements from the state of Ohio for property tax rollback and homestead exemptions. The legislature changed the name during the biennium budget process with House Bill 33 because they wanted to make sure that everyone understood that the state is paying for this share of property taxes. This forecast does assume that this reimbursement will remain throughout the forecast period as it stands today. It should be noted that these reimbursements are subject to the state legislature. and that the rollback reimbursement was actually eliminated on all new levies after 2013. And House Bill 1 of the current General Assembly would eliminate the rollback reimbursements from the state if it were passed, which you can see is approximately about $14.5 million for us this year. The legislature does continue to talk about this line item as an opportunity for reducing funding to public schools. But as I said, the forecast assumes that it will remain as it is. So a little more about the Fair School Funding Plan. So they implemented it beginning in fiscal year 2022, but again, it wasn't fully funded. And so that was through House Bill 110. So what they did was they said, okay, we'll calculate your funding and you'll receive 17% of whatever that increase is that you would be due. So Westerville, for example, was capped previously. And so we continue to be capped because in 22, we only received 17% of the increase we should have otherwise received. In 23, it was 33%. And in 24, it's 50%. And in 25, it's 67%. So the intention is to phase it in over 6 years. But again, it's subject to the state's biennium budget, whether that happens. So House Bill 110 was the first one, and then House Bill 33, and we have no idea what we'll see for the next biennium. Oh. Sorry. So this is just a table of the calculation. I like to call it state school underfunding when I do this. So actual fiscal year 2021, that was the non-formula that we had, where we just continued to receive the same funding we had in the previous year. And then the governor threw in the student wellness and success funds. We were underfunded in that year by $13.1 million. So in fiscal year 22 was the first year of the Fair School Funding Plan. We were underfunded by $6.2 million. But the state also eliminated our transfers out. So if we remember previously, we had direct transfers out from charter schools and for private school scholarships. Those transfers were eliminated, which was an overall savings to the districts. And then, so for fiscal year 23, we were underfunded by about $1.8 million. For this year, we're projected to be underfunded by $4.8 million. And next year, $2.7 million. So if we're just looking at this 5-year period, we're underfunded by $28.6 million. Looking at all other receipts, these include payment of lieu taxes, the Board of Revision settlements that we talked about, interest revenue, tuition from other districts for court-placed students and students who are residing in our district for whatever reason, for being educated in our district for whatever reason, student fees, and then other miscellaneous receipts. The pilot revenue will decrease as tax abatements roll off and those values are added to the tax base. Interest rates, as I've mentioned, have increased over the years, and we are projecting those to begin dropping again in fiscal year 25. House Bill 126 eliminated the Board of Revision settlements after the one-time increase we saw. And then all other revenue sources are generally one-time receipts. So these include our Medicaid reimbursements. We also expect to receive an E-rate reimbursement in the current fiscal year 24 of about $1 million. That's a one-time reimbursement. Shout out to Tim Stifler in the back for all his work on that, for our infrastructure update. Revenue uncertainty. So state funding over the last few budget cycles have been somewhat unpredictable. I know we dealt with COVID during that time, but like I have mentioned before, the state is very quick if there are problems to cut schools first before they do anything else. The Fair School Funding Plan has helped, but it hasn't been fully implemented. We did experience significant cuts in 20 and 21 due to the pandemic. The rollback is continually talked about when it comes to funding. And the legislative changes like House Bill 1, property values, property tax collections, and the economy could all have an impact on revenues going forward. And looking at expenditures, they are anticipated to increase annually as the cost of doing business and inflation rises, or inflation stays high. This forecast includes us opening Minerva Park Middle School in the current fiscal year 24, and we opened Minerva France Elementary School last year in fiscal year 23. And then the biggest hit to our revenues or to our expenditures are the portions of the ESSER funds that were being used to offset revenue losses. Those will be expiring and returning back to the general fund in fiscal year 25.
Nicole,
Yes.
quick question. Can you just talk about, you mentioned inflation of expenses, like how that, just in sort of broad brush, how you calculate that into some of these items?
So it depends on what the category is,
Yep.
really. But overall, we look at, we could have anywhere from 3 to 15, 20%, depending on what the category is. So medical expenses, for
Yep.
example, are a big one. So we've seen high medical claims, and we're looking at like over 13% increase just for that.
And so the important piece of that is you're not just applying a blanket number across a bunch
No.
of categories. You're being very, very
Yeah, we're being
careful
very
about how you,
specific
yeah.
to whatever the area is.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. Thanks.
Oh. Yeah, okay. So looking at overall expenditures, the district's largest expense is personnel. We are a people business. We grow people and educate people and, you know, all of those wonderful things. And we need people to do that. So those were 81% of total expenditures in the last fiscal year, and they're projected to remain at 81% in fiscal year 2028. And the picture here is students at McVeigh Elementary performing Frozen. Just love it. All right. Wondering if Jennifer will just see me click in and move it on. Okay. Personnel, so for fiscal years 24 and 25, we're using the estimates from the district's actual staffing plan. For fiscal years 26 through 28, we do have estimates based on average salaries. The new staff in the previous fiscal year, 23, from Minerva France Elementary, and then we had the principal for the Minerva Park Middle School. And then we have new staff hired for opening Minerva Park Middle School this fiscal year, 24. Like I mentioned, medical insurance, we're seeing large increases due to high utilization of the plan and high medical cost claims. And then ESSER 1 provided for $2 million, ESSER 2 provided for $6 million, and ESSER 3 provided for $16.9 million offset expenditures to cover the personnel expenditures that were normally paid out of the general fund. And that will be through fiscal year 2024. Those expenditures will fully return to the general fund next fiscal year in fiscal year 2025. The student here is at Alcott Elementary competing in the 3rd grade talent show, playing his guitar. Other expenses, so purchase services is our largest other expenditure line, and includes payments to other districts for tuition for special needs and other students, utilities and other services. Materials and supplies includes textbooks, software licenses, consumable items that do not have long-term useful lives. Capital outlay includes equipment, technology, and other items that do have long-term useful lives. Other objects include services provided from the ESCCO, such as our teaching substitutes and our classroom aides, and any tax collection fees that were charged from the county for property tax collections. Operating transfers out include transfers to the Permanent Improvement Fund for turf replacement and also to the Food Service Fund to carry any negative balances at the end of the year, because the Food Service Fund cannot carry negative balances. Like I mentioned, inflation is anticipated to remain high throughout the forecast period, and the students in this picture are participating in a dance-a-thon at Faust Elementary. Just thinking about expenditure uncertainty and things that could affect the forecast going forward would be our staffing needs, the educational needs of students, the economy and inflation, healthcare costs, and any unfunded mandates that we might have from the legislature. So this graph shows revenues, expenses, and changes in the unreserved fund balance over the forecast period, including the last 3 fiscal years. Notable changes, we had the operating levy, the 5.9 mil operating levy that was approved in 2019, began collections in calendar year 21. We opened the new Minerva France Elementary School last year, opening Minerva Park this middle school this year. The projections show 6 days unreserved cash balance projected for fiscal year 28, and it would be 38 days if we didn't have any reserves. The deficit spending is expected to be large. I have a little highlighter here. Oh, that didn't highlight very well, does it? So the ESSER funds expiring, returning to the general fund in fiscal year 2025. You can see when that's when that really starts separating in our projections. And this forecast does assume flat state funding after the current biennium budget based on what we know today. Given the projected deficit, I am recommending that the board consider an operating levy in the fall of 2024, by the fall of 2024, which would first collect in calendar year 2025, which would give us a half-year collections in fiscal year 25 and a full year collections in fiscal year 26, beginning in 26. And so we have a whole work session planned to talk about those things. My last picture here, I love this. This is Hawthorne's Kindness Council, which is a new initiative teachers and staff members launched in October. And when the council meets each month, Hawthorne hits the pause button for 30 to 45 minutes, and classes from different grade levels partner together on community building activities and service projects. Isn't that cute? There. All right, that's what I have. What questions do you have? Any? Or wait for the work session?
Yep.
You want to? Okay.